in hindsight, was I ready for that massive exposure? Probably not. I really don't talk about this. It's because we're quite relaxed and we know each other.
Are you happy to talk about it?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Good.
I knew in my heart from about the middle of the season that I wouldn't get renewed. They hadn't told me that, of course. They never tell you.
Hi, I'm Mark Priestley. I spent almost a decade at the McLaren Formula One team alongside inspirational people such as Kimi Raikkonen, Lewis Hamilton, Fernando Alonso, but also people like Adrian Newey and Ron Dennis. I created the Pitlane Life Lessons Podcast to share many of those things that I've learnt with you to help you to think about the challenges in your life a little bit more like a Formula One team might think about them. Enjoy. Today's guest is Jennie Gow. Not only has she had a remarkable journey through high-end motorsport and broadcasting, but she also nearly died a couple of years ago after having a stroke. In today's episode, she shares some valuable lessons, not only to help you succeed in life and business and through whatever you're going through, but also some lessons that could literally save your life. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Jennie, thank you so much for coming down and being part of this today. We spend quite a lot of time together in various roles, don't we? We have done over the years. It feels like our careers have intertwined in lots of different ways. But I'm really grateful for you to coming down and sharing some of your story, because what a story you've got, right? You had the most amazing story anyway in your journey through motorsport, through MotoGP, into Formula One. And then your story took this incredible twist, which I really want to get into a bit later, but you had effectively a near-death experience. You had a stroke, right? You nearly died. Yeah. So we'll get
Thanks.
We'll get to that. I mean, that's an unbelievable set of circumstances and must have changed everything for you. But before we get to that, I want to go back to the beginning and sort of work your way through your career, because I know you started in local radio. You did lots of sort of little bits of broadcasting when you got into that side of things, and that led you through bikes, bit of speedway, I think, motocross, and eventually what feels like it must have been a big break, you get the opportunity to present MotoGP. Tell me how that was as a moment in time.
You're right. There was a lot that went into that moment. And I think presenting on Sky Sports News and all of the things that I did before that moment were fundamental to how I coped and how I progressed in my career. So regional radio, local radio was an amazing place to be. And I was so lucky that I grew up in a time where you could go to local radio and get a job and do a bit of everything.
Yeah.
So I did that. I learned everything I could on the way up. And I think that was kind of my first lesson, was just to soak everything up and learn and absorb as much as I possibly could on the way up, and not to work to this goal that was far away. Just take one moment and learn that and then go on to the next one.
Did you have a goal in mind at any point in terms of broadcasting?
No, I didn't. And that's the weird thing. I've never, even now, I can never tell you, what do you want to do in 5 years? I don't know. No. I've never known. I just always hoped that I would get into broadcasting and find a place that I loved. And there have been times along that way where I haven't loved it, but I've kind of endured it. And those are the things that teach you the most, I think, when it's not going well. But to go to that MotoGP moment, I was working for Sky. I was, I think, starting to date my now husband, and I didn't see it coming at all. And I got a phone call from a guy that I'd known at the BBC when I was there as a production secretary back in 1999. And he called me and just said, look, this role's up for grabs. Do you fancy it? And you're caught in that middle of two things. Excitement, because it's a BBC role and you know that that's kind of where you'd love to be.
And it's BBC television as well.
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
So it's a big deal.
Yeah.
And I could see it being the start of something amazing. But on the other side of things, I knew it was stepping into a massive role that someone else had made their own. And in my experience, you could only ever fail at that.
So that was Susie Perry, who was, I guess, a pretty well-known face, very experienced, been doing it for a long time.
Yeah.
I guess, quite well loved in that sport.
I mean, adored.
Yeah.
Absolutely adored. And I actually phoned my old boss from my BBC days and said, look, I still remember the conversation. I was in an airport queue waiting to fly somewhere. And I phoned him. I just said, this opportunity's arisen. And I don't know what to do. Part of me definitely wants to say yes. And the other side of me goes, don't touch it with a barge pole.
Because of the Susie Perry influence.
Yeah.
So that's interesting that you had the hesitation. Do you reckon that's something that is it a nervousness or a kind of a lack of confidence, or what is that something that's prevalent in you? Do you always have that hesitation with big things like this?
You know me too well. Yes, of course I do. I'm a nervous wreck. And I have no confidence at all, which is weird because everyone assumes that being a presenter and finding a place in F1, everyone must be really confident. But in my experience, there is a lack of confidence and self-esteem with every single presenter I've ever met.
Every single person.
Yeah.
Somewhere.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah. And I think F1 has a very good job of making everyone look amazing. Yeah. Everyone seems faultless. But actually, it's just a lot of very nervous people just skating on very thin ice all the time.
Yeah.
And that role, it wasn't about Susie. It was just about the fact that someone very established and very well loved was leaving. And did I really want to take that jump and go into a role I thought I could do a good job with, but I couldn't be Susie?
It's a bit like the Top Gear effect, isn't
it?
Yeah, same sort of thing.
Yeah.
But you took it.
I did. Probably against my better, what's the word?
Judgment,
thank you. The stroke still causes me to lose some words every now and then. But yes, against my better judgment, I took it. And it was the poison chalice I was worried it would be. Immediately?
Really?
Yeah. So it was obviously a massive job with lots of PR and there was some stuff I absolutely loved. But there were other things that I felt very underprepared for. So I remember doing a photo shoot the first round was in Qatar. And I did a photo shoot there. And I was wearing like a grey T-shirt. And I look back at that and go, what the hell was I doing? Why was I wearing a grey T-shirt? It's just so anonymous. And it was when Twitter was just taking off.
Yeah.
Oh my God. The abuse was horrific.
Because of the T-shirt, the photo?
Just because I wasn't Susie.
Oh, really?
I mean,
okay.
It was just, I wasn't prepared for that either.
But I guess, the point is you could never be Susie, and you're never trying to be. You're Jennie. And so do you have a feeling, and do you still now look back, have it with a feeling that you were never given a fair crack at that?
I made the most of it. Yeah. I tried so hard. But that year was a disaster, in all honesty. And I haven't really spoken about it because it's quite personal, isn't it? When you have to look back on your life and go, that was disastrous. And how could I have made that different? Could I have made it different? And not only was I going into a really well-established role, trying to be me, but it made it much worse because the production was moving the year after I got the job.
To a new production company.
Okay. So everyone in those roles, that had been in those roles for 13 years and knew what they were doing and loved it, found themselves in a position where they were leaving at the end of that year.
That's tough.
Or they could have gone to the new production, but it was a big change. Yeah. So not only were they losing their jobs in essence, or some of them would be, but they were also dealing with a new presenter.
It's a hard environment for everybody, I guess, in that moment to be in.
Yeah, they had a brand new producer there. So everything was set up for me to fail, basically. Yeah. And every time I went to a round, I tried my hardest. I did all the prep. I tried to ingratiate myself with the people there. And I have a lot of friends that I met there. More namely the riders.
Yeah.
Because I got on with them and they took me for me. They didn't care about the politics. They didn't care what was going on. We just got on.
Yeah.
But it was just a really stressful environment. And the more it continued, the more I felt like I wasn't part of the team. The more I suffered with really high levels of pressure and stress. And the whole thing just got into this really anxious, horrible moment where I couldn't do my best because I there was nothing that I could do.
Yeah, it's impossible to operate at your best when you've got that level of chaos and stress going on around you.
I remember at the start, I think it was the start of the Australian GP in Phillip Island, which is great. And I went to see penguins and I tried to have the best time possible. And I did get on with some people, but there was a very strange environment to be in. And I was standing on the grid ahead of the race, all the riders there, and we're about to go live. And I was like, I'm going to be sick. This is awful. I'm so anxious, so stressed,
Really?
Felt so unsupportive or unsupported. And I just felt I was going to be sick. And I was like, what's going to happen? The rider's going to have to go off from the grid and there's going to be a pile of sick and they're going to crash and it's all going to be my fault. And I managed to hold it together. But those were the sort of thoughts I was thinking when I was presenting to camera on BBC Two, I think that was. Yeah. And you're just like, how can this even be? I've got this biggest opportunity and I'm screwing it up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, the reality is, with the benefit of hindsight, I'm sure you weren't screwing it up. You were faced, as you said, with a very difficult set of circumstances. Thanks so much for getting this far through today's episode. I would love it if you could interact somehow with the Pitlane Life Lessons podcast by dropping us a like or a comment, a rating, wherever it is you're listening or watching. It really makes a massive difference. Back to the episode. With the benefit of hindsight, I mean, are there things you would do differently if you were doing it again? Would you have even taken the job? Or would you approach it differently?
I think I always would have taken the job.
Yeah.
Because it was an opportunity you can't throw away. When someone's giving you that opportunity that you've dreamt of for so long, to be in control of a sport, to be presenting a sport on BBC One sometimes, you can't knock that opportunity away.
Yeah.
And I did have faith in myself. I did think I could do this. But in hindsight, was I ready for that massive exposure? Probably not, in honesty. Would I be different now? Absolutely. Yeah. But I've got 13 years experience of presenting that I could take to that role now.
Well, and especially that experience of presenting. So from that experience, what do you think are the biggest things you learned from that? I mean, dealing with that pressure, with that stress, you must have learned things to that you could now use to cope, I guess, better.
Yeah, I think so. I went to CBT that year, which is a talking therapy. I really don't talk about this. It's because we're quite relaxed and we know each other.
Are you happy to talk about it?
Yeah, I'm fine.
I just think it's really useful because lots of people will feel stressful situations like this in all walks of life. You don't have to be presenting television. Everyone feels this at times. Even kids feel this at school.
Yeah.
This stuff happens in real life.
And I do think it's really important to talk about it and not bottle it up, because if you bottle it up, you end up standing on a grid feeling really sick and worrying that you're going to make a massive crash in MotoGP or whatever your life experience is.
That would have been a story.
It would have been a story. I'm not sure it would have been a great one. I'm not sure how those tyres would have reacted. But I think talking about it with someone who can help you is really important. Let it go.
Did you have a therapy at the time or afterwards?
Yeah, at the time. Okay. So, well, I think it was just at the end of that. I knew in my heart from about the middle of the season that I wouldn't get renewed. Right. They hadn't told me that, of course. They never tell you. But I knew. I was, getting more and more abuse online. I won some hearts over. And I remember going to a party after Jorge Lorenzo won the championship that year. And he was great. And his crew were great, and it was a great party. It was in Malaysia, and everyone jumped to the pool, and it was one of those life experiences. You've had so many of them where everyone is just happy.
Yeah.
And I just, for a moment, thought, probably as I was mid-jump into a pool, of, oh, this could have been amazing. But yeah, talking about it and working out not kind of where it went wrong, because I don't think in CBT they don't address that particular issue. They just teach you ways of relieving that stress.
Yeah.
So I was taught breathing exercises, which I still do.
Yeah.
I found it really useful. And fighter pilots do breathing exercises. F1 drivers do breathing exercises. It's such an integral part of being in control of your mind and your body.
Totally.
That I found it really useful. And any time I feel like I'm in a stressful situation, I go back to the basics of, right, box breathing, in, hold, out, hold. And that's all I kind of need to do to get back in control. But it's not easy to have those conversations, is it?
No.
And admit weakness.
Yeah, well, it's not even admitting a weakness, is it, necessarily? It's just because I don't see it as a weakness. I mean, literally everybody listening or watching this podcast will have felt that at some point. And so if everybody has it, it can't be a weakness. It's normal, isn't it? If everyone's got it, it is the norm.
But it's so weird then. If it's the norm, why does no one talk about it?
Well,
I mean, we talk about it more now.
Yeah.
Back then, no one was talking about it.
It's true. It's very true. And you know, coming back to the breathing thing, it's such a simple solution, you know, and it can be really effective just in a split second. It doesn't take very long. You don't need anything to be with you.
It's so primal, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
You have to go back to, right, how do I get in control of my health, my body, my breathing, everything? And it's inside us that if you do those breathing exercises, you will feel calmer.
Yeah. And practicing it as well means that you lower your baseline of kind of stress and stress responses. And so, yeah, it's just a good thing to kind of learn and get to grips with as a tool. Just before we move on to much happier times when you got your job in F1, just interested to know, when you just said there, you said, you know, around halfway through the season, in your mind, you were fairly convinced they weren't going to renew your contract. What was the response there? Did you sort of take the view of, oh my goodness, it's all gone wrong and it's a disaster? Or do you say, well, okay, if this is going to be it, let's enjoy it? How did you respond?
I think a bit of both. Just because of the situation around me, it was really hard to enjoy it, but I did try.
Yeah.
Tried my hardest to be the life and soul of the party, to try and do everything, be everything to everyone. Because as a main presenter, you kind of have to lead your team. And it's very hard to lead your team if the team don't really care about you.
Yeah.
And that's no disrespect to them. They were all great at what they did, and as a team, they were really happy. It was just impossible to get into that team and ingratiate myself because the team was done already.
Yeah. I mean, they're going through their own difficulties, I guess.
Exactly.
Their jobs are coming to an end.
So there was a lot of drinking. There was a lot of partying. Yeah. There was a lot of me staying in my room trying to learn lines and trying to be a presenter that I didn't really know how to be. And yeah, I just tried to make the most of it. And you always think, oh, maybe I can turn it around.
Yeah.
So you're always like trying your best. But actually, trying my best was possibly the worst thing I could do. I just needed to relax.
You over-try, don't you? Yeah.
And start overthinking everything. So if I had just relaxed and, as you say, enjoyed it, maybe it would have been better. But yeah.
Which I guess is one of the things you would probably do now, knowing what you now know with the benefit of hindsight, is relax more. You find out what you've got these tools to help you relax.
Yeah.
Well, look, let's jump to a massive positive to come out of that, because that leads on to eventually an opportunity to get into another massive global motorsport, Formula One, where for the last 15 years or so you must have been now in Formula One?
Yeah, it's been a while.
How did that come about?
So I was incredibly lucky that I had worked my way up through the different series, through the different sports, and met some amazing people. One of them is a man called Richard Hay. Mm-hmm. And at the time he was running Hay Fisher, which is an independent production company. And I'd worked with him in the passed, I think. My memory is really bad now. It's not just come old, but also the stroke has interfered with my brain and kind of shaken it up and started again. So I remember getting a phone call from him. I was in the back garden of my house thinking, I am in deep poop. I don't know, am I allowed to swear on this podcast? I'm so BBC, I don't know what I can say. I was in deep trouble and I didn't know where my life was going and I couldn't see a way out of
This is straight after coming out of MotoGP,
And I was just in this massive rut of, I don't know what I'm going to do. I've crashed and burnt. And I got a call from him saying, look, I've got some presenting roles. It's not BBC One. We don't have all the gubbins that you had before, but why don't you come down and see what you think? And it was April, it was bank holiday, and I just said, I'll just come down and see what I think.
Yeah.
And he spent, probably the rest of our lives currently, building me back up.
Yeah.
And he was just so kind. And he put me back together, basically. That and the therapy and someone just going, you know what? I believe in you. Believe in yourself. I've still never believed in myself. But he gave me enough belief that I could carry on and do the work for him and go, you know what? I am actually good at this. I just never got the chance before to show that and really, explore that and go, I'm okay at this. Yeah. So, yes, he built me kind of back up. And then I got a phone call from the Beeb saying they had a gap in their talent for F1 and would I like to go up for it? And I was like, oh, God.
And the moment that came, which everybody will remember, was the longest race in F1 history.
I couldn't pick it, honestly.
So it was 2011?
Yeah. Yeah. So I did some... Yeah, so 2010 was kind of a bit, what am I doing? 2011, I got a couple of gigs filling in for Natalie Pinkham.
Yeah, on the Beeb.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that was BBC Radio and the longest race in history. It was just crazy. There were I didn't know anyone. I'd never been to F1. I'd never pertained to be the biggest fan of F1. I loved it, but I didn't know everything about it. So I walked in and it was like a blank canvas. Yeah. Who am I talking to? I don't know. Let's just go and chat.
Do you think that helped or hindered in the end?
In some ways it helped. And I still believe that not having the ultimate knowledge of the sport is in my benefit for my role and what I do. I don't need to know everything. I just need to know the right questions to ask to get those answers. So it was difficult not knowing all the rules because there are so many rules in F1. There's so many things that you can't do, you can do. You have to have this before you can do that. And
I think on that day, not many people knew all the rules because things were changing so rapidly and there were unprecedented sets of circumstance. Even the teams were struggling to get their heads around what was about to happen. So I dread to think what it must have been like from your point of view on day one.
Carnage. And I was working with David Croft and Maurice Hamilton.
Yeah.
Who, when I first got the phone call, you're going to be working with, I thought, oh, that's amazing. They've got Lewis Hamilton's dad. And I walked into this diner in Montreal to meet the team and expected to see Lewis Hamilton's dad. And I very quickly realised it was not Lewis Hamilton's dad on many levels. But it was actually Maurice Hamilton, who is an acclaimed journalist and author and is still one of my biggest cheerleaders to this day. And I love him to bits. But he is not Lewis Hamilton's dad. So that's how little I knew of F1. But I just winged it.
Well, I think, like I say, in many regards, it may have been one of the best introductions, right? Because so many people were winging it. I mean, anyone who was on air was feeling like they've never filled before. It gave opportunity for someone like you down in the pits, loads of opportunity to sort of describe the colour that was going on and this amazing set of circumstances. On in inverted commas, normal race weekend, you wouldn't have got anywhere near that level of opportunity. So what a sort of a baptism of fire, but what a blessing.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. Because I was able to walk down the pit lane and speak to all these different people. It was like an introduction to F1.
Yeah.
And then I walked down the paddock, and you're going in and just finding anyone you can to help out the commentary team. And as you say, to bring that colour.
Yeah.
And to just not be them having to talk for just a moment. It's really hard when you're the one in control of a programme. And it's up to you. You have to find some words.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, helping them out was integral.
What did you find as the biggest differences between the MotoGP paddock and the F1 paddock? Because effectively, you're kind of doing a similar thing. You're stepping into someone else's shoes when you first arrive in Formula One too.
Yeah, I think the whole Spanishism of MotoGP makes it a very different paddock.
Yeah, culturally very different.
Yeah, absolutely. Dorna is a Spanish organisation, and you go into that paddock and...
So Dorna are the people that run the sport effectively, right?
Yeah. They're the FOM, I suppose, of the sport. And it was just a very different place. It was much smaller, so much more access to everybody at MotoGP, which is why you could actually get to be friends, in inverted commas, with riders.
Yeah.
It wasn't as guarded. You didn't have to have someone with a... what's the word?
Pass, accreditation.
No, they record everything, don't they?
The dictaphones, the PR
Dictaphone.
person. Yeah,
Thank you.
got
My
it.
gosh. It's like playing bingo with me. You just have to work out what the word is. They didn't have any of that, so it was very free. Walking into F1, even in those days, you kind of felt like, okay, it's very British.
Yeah.
Everyone has to speak English.
Yeah.
You have to go into a press conference and speak English. So it's just so different.
Yeah.
So many people, so many rules, but very welcoming, I found.
Right.
Of a new female coming into the sport.
Which is lovely to hear. It's how I feel about the place as well. But it doesn't sound like MotoGP was quite the same. Certainly not in the bit you were parachuted into. So that must have been a nice, welcoming change, right?
Absolutely, and I felt supported by the team.
Yeah,
and that was the biggest difference.
Yeah,
I was being backed by someone, and I felt like they wanted me to win.
Yeah,
whereas I didn't feel that before, which is it's very sad. But I think you have to have buy-in from everybody to win, and that doesn't matter what you're doing. But if you can't get your team to support you and feel like they're rooting for you, it's never going to work.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think from what you've described about that moment in time in MotoGP, there was so much going on politically and with, even like you say, the team was struggling to get their heads around what they were going to do. Their careers were taking a massive shift anyway. So maybe that was a special set of circumstances. But it's really lovely to hear that Formula One was so welcoming because, as I said, I found the same. But I also know that my personal journey from the pit lane side with the team to then moving over into broadcasting started with you. So everything you've just described about your journey into Formula One and turning up, people being welcoming, you were my version of that because I'd got dropped in. It was an opportunity to sort of shadow you at British Grand Prix, having never done anything in broadcasting ever. And it was you that sort of, I guess, took me under your wing. And my point is that you were so unbelievably kind. That's who you are. That's the person I now know you to be. But you were so welcoming and supportive. And another person could have quite easily looked at this guy coming in with a set of experience that you haven't got as a threat. And you never thought of that. And the way you treated me, I'll never take for granted because it was really kind and welcoming. So I would say that you have made a lot of this happen for yourself because of who you are. And what I wrote down in my notes here is, do you think of kindness as a competitive strength in the world in general? Because I do, and I think you're a good example of it.
Oh, well, thank you. That's nice to hear. I was shown great kindness when I came to F1 by Holly Samos. Yeah. And she was the presenter. Then it was Natalie for 1 year, and then it was me. As the pit lane reporter, and she messaged me with this long list of who I could speak to in each team, who to go to, how to be an F1 pit lane reporter.
That's nice.
And I've never received any sort of guidance in what to do apart from that one email.
Yeah.
And that's the sort of person I want to be.
Yeah.
I want to be the person that goes, you know what, this is great, come on the journey and succeed.
Yeah.
Because it's just a great place to work, and there's enough for everyone to do what they want to do. You don't have to fear who's coming up, because if you're half decent at what you're doing, you'll succeed.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
I still worry that I won't succeed and that I won't get a renewal of my contract each year.
Yeah, I mean,
I think that's just the circumstance we find ourselves in.
It's a tough business like that when you're freelance, especially. That's often how it is, and it is difficult to sort of build confidence when you're always on the edge of.
Yeah.
It feels like something's going to disappear. I get that. To go back to the kindness thing, it's interesting how it's so infectious, isn't it? You've experienced great kindness in those moments, and now that's who you are and how you operate, and you're passing it on to others. I've felt your version of that to me. I pass it on to other people. So I think it's an amazing thing that it's so infectious when you've received some great kindness that you pass it on, because it just changes a whole industry or whole environment, doesn't it? And I think Formula One's a really nice example of that. There's clearly opportunity in Formula One to not be kind, because it's so cutthroat and competitive. I think you go back 20 years and kindness was never really a thing, certainly amongst the teams, for example. It was all about how can you get one over them? How can you sort of pull the rug out from beneath their feet? Because that could give you a little leg up. And I think that even in the team side of things, that's changed. If you look back at, McLaren had the fire in their motorhome recently, and then all the other teams immediately come to their aid, sharing food and cooking the team dinner. And I see those kind of things as, if I look at Mercedes, who I know helped them out a lot, the way I think about Mercedes because of that changes completely, right?
Yeah.
So it's so infectious throughout the industry. And
I think when you look at F1 as a whole, there have always been great acts of kindness, despite the intense rivalry. When the shit hits the fan, I still feel weird saying shit, and when it all goes wrong, people step up, and they step up with, as you say, being kind, being there for you. This is a very extreme circumstance. We're traveling the world with these 3,000-4,000 people week in, week out. And I'm sure it's more intensified in a team when you're competing. We're not competing, so it's slightly different. But you are traveling the world, and there are times when it all goes wrong. And that's when motorsport and F1 steps up. Yeah. And they are really supportive. And I think some of that, if you look at Williams, for example, and what Sir Frank managed to achieve both before the crash and after the crash, and it was because F1 is so accepting, and he was so determined to come back, and that, I mean, he was only ever kind when I went into them. He was determined, he was angry sometimes, he was a real tink, I would say. I don't know what better word to describe it. He was just mischievous more. Yeah. But he was kind. Yeah. And I think kindness does run through the paddock in a very sometimes strange, warped way, but I think it's there.
Yeah, and I think it's an important thing to recognise, because you can quite easily look at the competitive nature of the sport and people trying to circumnavigate rules and doing these sort of slightly grey area type, technical things that might seem that they're not being kind, that it's all about winning at all costs. And I think it's really important to note that it's not like that underneath the skin. There's that element to it, of course, but these are a bunch of humans, as you say, travelling the world together. And actually, I think the big moments of kindness, like the ones you've described, I remember the Williams fire back in 2012. Again, all the other teams came to their aid so they could compete at the next round. Those things which are not, front and centre because they're not happening on the racetrack, they happen all of the time. And I think, Williams is a very much loved team. Very clearly, it paid back when they had their moment of need. So I think it's a really important trait, is my point, that I think everybody should really consider, because it can be a competitive strength as well as just being nice. talking of the sort of kindness of Formula One and how we've got this family unit, and it really is a lovely environment.
Dysfunctional family, but family,
yeah. Totally. If we fast forward through much of your Formula One career to the big moment that happened a couple of years ago that we can't not talk about.
No one could talk about it, though. It's like, don't talk about it.
No, we should, because look, we came very close to a situation where you could not have been sat here. Not just because you couldn't have been sat here, but you would have been dead. It was that close, right? It was a near-death experience. So let's talk about the moment you had a stroke. Was it 2 years ago now, effectively, just over?
Yeah.
I know you've spoken about this a lot, so go into as much or as little detail as you want, but I think the message of what you've learned from that is really important, because it could literally save other people's lives. Yeah,
so I woke up on the 29th of December, 2020. I still get confused. 2022. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
Yeah, 22. So that would be right.
It's bad, isn't it? I'm asking you to remind me of my life. Yes. And I'd had flu. I didn't realise it was flu. I was just snotty and coughy. But it was bad. And I went downstairs, did like one of those inhalation steamers, went to the toilet, coughed, and that was the last I remember. My husband found me collapsed on the floor in the downstairs toilet. Lovely place to be found. But luckily, he was there. I mean, there's a lot of times where I'm on my own in the house, or, I'm away from the house working. So it was quite strange that it happened on the day where he was around.
Well, you could have also been there. You're a mum.
Yeah.
Could have been just your daughter at home.
Yeah.
In that moment.
Which, she was there. She witnessed everything. She tried to help as much as she could. She was great, from what I've been told and from what I remember. But yeah, Jamie, my husband, quickly realised something was seriously wrong. I couldn't speak. My body was starting to go paralysed on one side, my right-hand side. The stroke happened in the left-hand side of my brain, so the right side, it's so weird, gets paralysed. So it's always the opposite side.
And it all happens very quickly.
Really quickly. And Jamie had seen something, I think, above a photocopier at work, which had the acronym of FAST, which is what you're meant to do if someone suffers from a stroke. Yeah. And we don't talk about strokes enough, which is why I'm very keen to raise more awareness and talk about it, because it's like a hidden illness.
Yeah.
I don't even know if you call it an illness. It's not a disease, but it's something critical that happens in your life. And yeah, it happened so suddenly. I don't remember much of it. I remember parts of the ambulance journey. And he was able to see what was happening. And the acronym of FAST is face, arms, speech, and then time. Mm-hmm. So if you can't speak, if your face is drooping, there are more things about balance and eyesight now that we know.
So the arms is if you can't raise your arms?
If you can't raise your arms, yeah. If you can't speak, then get on the phone and ring 999 and react quickly to it. And the quicker you can react, the better it will be, because for every moment you're there, your brain is just getting destroyed. Being
starved of blood flow.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
So the clot travels up, as you say, starves the brain from blood, and your neurons just die. And there's no way of getting those back. So the quicker you can go to hospital and get diagnosed, which is also a problem, especially if you're younger, because why would I have a stroke? Yeah. But I was lucky. I got diagnosed really quickly. I got given the clot busting drug that they give you. Uh-huh. Transferred up to St George's, which is a hospital in London that specialises in stroke. Again, lucky to have that service so close to our house.
Is this all within an hour, minutes, hours? How long is this taking?
Yeah, hours. Yeah. I think I was operated on up at St George's within the 4-hour window.
And that's the limit, is it, before there's permanent damage?
You can extend it a little bit, but after that point, they can't do this operation, which is a thrombectomy. Right. Which means they go in through your groin and follow that blood vessel all the way up to your head.
Wow.
Through your brain, into your brain, where they get this little claw thing. It's obviously not that big,
Wow.
which I'm so mad. It's a tiny little claw, and they try and grab the clot and pull it out.
My goodness, I had no idea. That's
I
incredible.
know, it's so weird. But it's an amazing operation. It's not available to everyone, and it's such a shame that it's not more readily available.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was lucky to be able to have that operation. I don't know what the result would have been if I hadn't. We'll never know.
No.
And there was a debate about do they do it or not. They put it into this big computer, and Jamie's just said, whatever you do, just do what you need.
Yeah.
And for him, it was hard because he was making decisions about me.
Yeah.
And he was like, do I have to phone his parents? I mean, all of a sudden, you're responsible. And that's a really hard position to be in. But they did the operation within the window, but I still couldn't speak. So they assumed it hadn't been a success.
Right.
Because they would have expected me to start speaking a bit quicker. So yeah, being in a hotel room, hospital room even, it very much wasn't a hotel room. But I did have my own private room because they diagnosed me with flu, not COVID, I have to say again. It was strange because I was in that room. No one could come in unless they were in full kit with masks and gloves and everything. So people just didn't come in.
Yeah.
So I was on my own so much and trapped inside my body. It was a horrific experience looking back.
Well, yeah, I mean, lonely, terrifying, I'm sure so many other words that I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
So it's interesting hearing you talk about how lucky you were given the circumstances that you found yourself in, because I mean, I completely get it. It sounds like there were so many occurrences that had they just gone slightly the other way, things could have been very different.
Yeah.
So the journey from that point and the sort of the recovery, which again I'm sure is lonely and terrifying, the point when you can't speak. You're a broadcaster. That's your job. That's what we've just been talking about. You spent your career building up to this point.
My whole life.
Yeah, true. That's not even to mention how we need to use language and communication in just every day as a parent, as a wife, and everything else we do. Your career, a large part, I imagine, of your identity relies on your communication. It's what you're good at. So how on earth do you square off in your mind that thing that you spent all of your life training for and building towards has effectively gone?
You don't. You never accept it. In my head, I've never accepted the fact that that was an option. I mean, yes, we had lots of things that clicked into place when the stroke happened, and Jamie was on the phone to all my different employers, his people at Sky, insurance people, all sorts of people to try and keep our family lives going, even though I was all of a sudden out of it. His parents came and took Isabel, our daughter, who was 6 at the time, down to their house. She witnessed too much that day.
Yeah.
And I'm sure our therapy bills will be a massive in the end, because what she went through, you wouldn't wish on any child. But she seemed to be very resilient, and we all just kept on going.
Yeah.
That's all you can do. When it really gets bad, you just have to take one foot and keep the next foot going. And that's metaphorical, not reality, because I was in the bed and not being able to move so much. But I think, again, I was quite lucky because my brain couldn't really compute everything that was going on. I wasn't like, it felt like I'd been unplugged back in, and everything, I had to relearn everything.
Yeah.
So everything was very slow. Everything was very much a minute by minute recovery. So I couldn't really think too much about the long term. I just had to try and find my voice.
Yeah.
And as long as I kept on trying and thinking, right, today is the day, got to find it. And it wasn't the day. Yeah. It took me 6 days to eventually try and get something out of my mouth. But yeah, all I could focus on was getting better for everyone's sake, for my daughter's sake, for my husband's sake, for my sake, for just everyone. And I think that experience of being an F1 and the attention to detail the relentless pursuit of endeavour kept me going. And all of that, I mean, we work around some incredible people, and we're very fortunate to work somewhere where most people are in the outstanding bracket of what they do.
Yeah.
And you just have to go, right, I've learned so much from these people, from being around these people for so long. Now is the time to put it all into place and practice and just get yourself better. And that's all I could think. It was so, I could relate it so much to being in the paddock.
That's so
and
interesting.
It was,
Well, I was going to ask you how your background in high-end motorsport and broadcasting might have helped shape your recovery, but because obviously there was presumably after you got over the initial the ability to make sounds again and start to get some speech back, there's a point presumably where you want to get back to, well, I'm assuming, do you want to get back to F1? There's a drive to get back there for all those reasons you just talked about, I guess, because of, but also the inspiration to get there must come from that world that you've kind of grown up in now in Formula One. And so I'm interested to know how much was there a drive to get back into doing the job again, and also having now done it, because we've worked together on some of these broadcasts over the last year
lucky
or so.
thing.
Yeah, but it's been great. It's been a wonderful thing to see. How's the experience of the F1 family, in inverted commas, been in terms of welcoming you back and supporting you along the way?
So I think we went public after about 2 weeks. My husband put together a message. We both decided it was what I wanted to do and what we want to do as a family. And the response was unbelievable. Like, I would never have, I just thought it was like a message to the wider community of people that I know and that I've met along the way and stuff. It just skyrocketed.
Yeah.
It was incredible. I remember coming into the lounge probably 2 weeks after we went public, and it was just full of flowers, full of gifts, full of cards, it was just full. And I was kind of just about walking and trying to learn to talk at that point, and it just blew me away that the motorsport and broadcasting world were so the outpouring of support and love. I didn't really realise my place within that community was so special until that moment. And I think it did change things. For the first time, I mean, we both work in situations where you never really get praise. You're always thinking about what you can do better, what you can do next, and looking for criticism in a way, because you can only get better if you get criticised and critiqued. And for the first time in my life, I went, "Oh, okay, I'm here. I've made it. I mean, this is validation of all I've done before. The fact that all these people are saying you can do this, you'll get better, and messages from drivers and all that love." And it was the first time I felt like I'd found my place and I deserved it, if that makes any sense. Totally, I don't know how to...
well, that's completely... Yeah. I mean, as I said before, I think moments like that is your version of the Williams fire, isn't it? It's you've had a moment of desperation and a moment of need, and this community has come together for you. And that doesn't happen by accident. It happens because, as I said earlier on, you are a lovely person, you're very kind, and you've treated people the right way along the way. It pays you back when you need it. So, as I said, you go back to this sort of competitive advantage that you get from kindness. If you don't have that, you're not going to get that response. You know, I'm not saying people would be nasty or mean, but they're not going to go out of their way to give you that level of response. And the impact that had on you clearly had a massive positive step in both your recovery, but also your journey back into this sport again. So all of these little actions and little details, these little behaviours that you displayed all these years earlier are a big part of that response and therefore into your recovery.
I think in terms of my recovery as well, I very much treated it as a full-time job. Like 6 hours a day. I would be there. I would be working to try and get my writing back, try and get my speech back. I worked with all these different therapists that the NHS have done an amazing job of supplying. And that became my life. Yeah. My life was just fully focused on this one thing. And I've never been fully focused on anything. Yeah. I've always been splitting my time here, there and everywhere. But I was just fully focused. All my brain could do and could, I don't know, focus on solely was getting better.
Well, it has to become your number one priority and your only priority, isn't it?
And it just took all the time. So, and I slept a lot, because when you've had an injury to your brain, the fatigue you get is like nothing I've ever experienced. Like, I was pregnant and I was tired with my daughter, and you go through that whole first year, and it's even the first week, like, what just happened? And it was more than all of that put together. Yeah. And I still suffer from fatigue, which is really annoying. But you just have to plow on. And I was so determined to get back to broadcasting, to get back to being who I was before. And I know people talk about that light bulb moment when something really big happens and cataclysmic change, and you find this light bulb moment of, I know what I want to be. I want to go off and be a monk and climb in the Hebrides or whatever. It never happened for me. It secured my thoughts of, I'm on the right track. I love what I do. I want to get back to doing what I want to do. Maybe I devote more of my time to my family when I'm not doing what I want to do, but actually I still have that drive and that work ethic that I've got from all the drivers that I've met along the way. Yeah. All the top engineers, all of those people, they're dedicated when they're in that paddock to F1. And I just had to pull all of those instincts together and go, you've got to do this.
It's really interesting. I mean, I always try and think of it, and I try and give other people this advice. If you've got a massive drama or a crisis or some big question in your life, I always try and think about it. What would an F1 team do? Yeah. How would an F1 team approach this? And it sounds like you've sort of done something similar. I want to get onto the book because we've only got a few minutes left. But you've written a book, which is a staggering accomplishment anyway. It's an amazing and difficult thing to achieve in the best of health, post-stroke, where you couldn't write, read or speak. Unbelievable. So I want to talk about that. But just before we get onto that, I want to talk about this idea of learning to get back to that situation where you can write and read again. You're having to presumably literally rebuild neurological pathways. As you were doing when you were a kid, you're forming new structures. So has it changed your perception of what you can do now? If you can do that at this stage in life, you can build new pathways and learn new things. This idea of can't teach an old dog new tricks, has it changed your perception of you could perhaps go on and learn anything now? Yeah,
I think so. You also have the downside of that, which is that your brain is not working the way you used to work. There is no doubt that my brain has suffered an injury, and it will never be the same as the brain that I had because part of it's dead. And you have to rebuild, as you say, those pathways, and as you can rebuild them, which is good. And I know some people, like, again, I've been lucky in that I've been able to rebuild them and rebuild them quite quickly. Yeah. And teach myself how to do things again, just through persistence and like give a dog a bone. I was like a dog with a bone. I would not give up and I would not give in.
And you didn't give in to the point where you've written a book and published a book.
It wasn't my idea. The BBC came to me and asked, would I like to do it? And I was like, no, I've just had a stroke. No way.
That's the point, right? You'd have never had that idea, surely. You'd have never sat there one day in your position and gone, I think I'd write a book. So it had to come from someone else. But then like that moment when the opportunity came in MotoGP all those years ago, you took it.
Yeah. Richard Maddock at the BBC called me. A lady called Nell convinced me to do it at Penguin, and I have to thank them so much because without them, as you say, I wouldn't have had that focus and drive to write a book, because who would? And writing that became very therapeutic in terms of it made me feel like I was almost back doing my job and sharing my experiences with people that I felt could be of benefit. And and just being part of the community when I wasn't being able to be there, and like opening a laptop, doing something so simple. I hadn't even thought of it. So learning to type again, having that focus of like 600 words today.
Yeah.
And you have to be very disciplined. And F1 has taught me to be very disciplined. So I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't been working for F1 in F1. I have no idea.
Well, it's a really interesting thought, isn't it? To have to go through what you've gone through without the benefit and the privilege of having this existence in Formula One. I wonder what it would have looked like, and what the recovery would have looked like, what life would have looked like today. Probably very different.
I mean, I've always been very driven. And I think most people like yourself, most people who want to be in F1 or are in F1 are very driven. You won't get there. No. If you're not very driven. So I think having a purpose for that drive is really useful. So that's one thing I have learned is focus on something and use that drive, that energy to just go for it. Whatever it is in your life, just go for it.
Yeah. Well, the book's called How to Read F1. It's been going down very well. You've been on a little bit of a book tour over the last month or so.
They're exhausting, aren't they?
Yeah.
I didn't realise they're hard enough writing a book, but actually the bit after writing the book, that's the bit that's exhausting. I didn't realise. I mean, you've done it before, you're doing it again. Am I allowed to say that? I don't know. Okay.
No, get very excited.
Second book. So, I mean, glutton for punishment, aren't you?
Well, yes, but, what you do get when it's done is you get the feedback. And I know you've been getting some really lovely feedback and it makes it so much more, not worthwhile, but it's a bit of validation, isn't it? For all that dark, lonely time when you are sat at the laptop, just typing away and for you, the struggle to do that was greater than most have had to go through. So massive congratulations.
Thanks.
Just before we wrap things up and let you get on your way, what would you say is the difference in Jennie Gow today, having gone through not just the journey through the top end of motorsport and broadcasting, but the stroke as well, from way back to where we start this conversation, you're doing your bits of local radio, you're just sort of on the beginning of this long journey. What's the biggest change that you've seen in you?
Oh, that is a really big question.
It is,
my goodness.
Answer it however
biggest
you like.
Change. I think. What's the biggest change? I don't know. I'm still as unsure as I was before.
Are you?
Yeah, I still feel that. And because you've had this massive life-changing moment and a stroke, and people don't really talk about strokes, you feel like, oh, crikey, am I going to be accepted back in? Will life be as good as it was before? Knowing that you're suffering from fatigue and that, you have to have a nap each day. It's not exactly F1, is it? So you still doubt your place. What have I
learned? I worked with Kimi Räikkönen for years. He had a nap every single day. just before a session most times.
I love that, though. It's a life lesson, nap more.
What would you go back and tell the Jennie doing the local radio as a bit of advice that you've now got?
I'd say enjoy the journey.
Yeah.
And I'm still trying to say that to myself now.
Yeah.
Enjoy it. You love this.
Yeah, good.
And make the most of those amazing experiences. I think maybe that's the thing. I feel like I've got a second chance. And I do go into the paddock, into life really, with a slightly different perspective. And I think I listen a lot more now than I used to. I was always in a hurry to get to the end of a conversation, I think.
Yeah.
Because that's F1. You're always looking over your shoulder for someone else.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think people talk to me more now about what's going on in their life and their insecurities and their vulnerabilities. And I have the opportunity to listen to that. So listen more. Enjoy it and listen more.
Brilliant advice. Yeah. Well, what a journey it's been so far. And, there's a long way to go, I'm sure. But what a wonderful journey. And so much really interesting advice, I think, for everybody at home, both from the motorsport side, but also from, the health perspective, that the stroke, your story suggests it can happen to anybody at any time. And it really is a kind of reminder to not take anything for granted, right? It can be taken away or at least massively affected in a heartbeat. And some of the advice you've given around dealing with that, looking out for that, could literally save lives. So massively valuable. So thank you so much for coming on and being part of this. It's, as I said, you are one of the kindest, loveliest people in that Formula One paddock. what you've just talked about today and the response people had to your moment of need, I think, speaks to that. So well done. Looking forward to many more wonderful years of us all working together. And thanks again for coming down.
Oh, it's been a real privilege, and thank you for having me on the show.
Well, what a lovely conversation that was with one of the loveliest people that I've ever had the privilege of working with, Jennie. So much in there to take out, to help people, to learn from, things that can even save lives. So please share it around, and whatever you're doing between now and the next time we speak, remember this: do the right things, do the things right.